All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last session of our MOOC, Defend 511. It always ends faster than I expect. And before I get going into any details on emerging markets, I have various logistical messages to pass along from George, otherwise I will get in trouble. And so, first of all, I need to remind you that your final exam is this weekend. You have 3 days in which to take it, and when you start it, you have a 2-hour period in which to complete it. It is 50 multiple choice questions, and so you have to pick a time within that 3-day period to start your 2-hour period in order to complete the exam. We strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to try and do the exam. If you've gotten this far in the course, there's no reason not to give it a shot. There's no reason not to get your certificate. There's no reason not to be in this elite early adopter group of Bitcoin blockchain education and receive your certificate, get it written into the blockchain, and earn something tangible from this course. So I hope many of you do the final examination, and we'll see a lot of you have completed it over the weekend. Next topic. I know quite a few people taking the MOOC are considering doing the Masters in Digital Currency, the full academic master's program. I want to say a couple of words about that. This was the first academic program focused on any of these topics. It still remains the only complete academic program focused on any of these topics. And it is going really super, super well. The first students are graduating from this program this spring. It's been a great bunch of students, people from around the world, generally a little bit more mature than the typical master's program. So we've had folks from, let's say, their mid-20s all the way to their 40s, I think. People from different professions, different walks of life. Some of them are just students continuing their education. A lot of them are entrepreneurs, business people, central bankers, doctoral students. And so it's been an engaging and compelling group. George and I have interacted with many of them over the last couple of years. The program is growing. There are dozens of people per cohort now, and it has been a really interesting experience. A lot of the courses in the MSc are really pushing the edge of where knowledge exists on this topic area today in and around blockchain, open financial systems, Bitcoin type issues. And so as people are graduating from these programs, they're going to be among the most qualified people in the world on this topic. And I imagine you'll see two pathways. Some of it are folks who plan to do something entrepreneurial, but are also just building up their knowledge base for it. And other ones are going to go into more typical careers. And I think it's going to be an amazing qualification for them to be able to say that. The program is taught in English, just like the MOOC is. It doesn't really matter where you live. The student base is scattered around the world, so we get a great sense of perspective from different people in different countries. It is similar in its delivery method to the MOOC, but the homework assignments, let's say, are more project-oriented. So relative to what we do in the MOOC, there are some cases where there are exercises or quizzes, but there are other courses where people team together from around the world and do a project. So George and I co-teach an open financial systems course. And on that course, the final output of the students is a business plan on how blockchain or Bitcoin can be used in some type of open financial system. So it is, I think, a wonderful experience. I hope to see many of you in the program as we've had after every other MOOC. I would encourage you to do the following. If you are interested, first, get in touch with your enrollment advisor. They can help you through the various mechanics of how to apply, ensure you have the documents in place that you can start the program. If you have questions, if you're somehow stuck in the process, if there's something you want to check, please reach out to George or me, and we'll see what we can answer and how we can help. And the next cohort starts June 6th, which is in a little less than a month from now. And it is better for you to be starting with a cohort. You'll finish faster and be in the main track of certain courses. So if you're going to do it, the time is now. Get in touch this week with your enrollment advisor, because depending on how many of your documents you have ready, what we need to review, it might take a couple of weeks in order for you to be admitted. And so don't wait too much longer post this course. So if you're thinking of doing it, I'd get in touch with your enrollment advisor, quite frankly, this week. So I hope to see many of you there. And it's an exciting time. I think this program is really pushing the envelope on this topic. All right. With that said, let's go to this week's questions. I'm going to start with a long question, and there's a question, and then there's some details about the question. So I might not read all of the details, but let me read the question. It says, how do you see the role of regulators helping or hindering bringing financial inclusion to the bottom of the pyramid? And then it discusses 3 examples. Telenor Pakistan, that is a telco in Pakistan and had a successful mobile payment system in Pakistan. And they had a banking license and they made mobile payments quite successfully in Pakistan. And then they went to India and withdrew from that market. They weren't able to replicate their success there. And the question is that because the Indian regulatory environment is more difficult or maybe difficult towards a Pakistani company or telecom company? That was the first example. The Philippines was a second example where the market started evolving for mobile payments without a formal license. And just like with many of these telco-based solutions, started with calling credit instead of cash as being the mechanism by which trading happened on the platform. And the banking regulators only came in later and formalized what was effectively already happening, because if they hadn't, half the country would be in an uproar because it was a quite effective system. And then the question is, how will these dynamics play with Bitcoin in the mix? Does it remove the banking regulator from the equation? Or are telcos going to be cautious because they don't want to have their licenses, either telecommunication or banking licenses, removed? Or do we need telcos at all? Should we rely on over the top? Or do you think a telco is well placed to be a bringer of financial inclusion? And should they work to gain the blessing of the regulators? So, complex, multi-part question, like some we've had this go around. Let me take a crack at it with multiple answers that may or may not all be directly related, but I think together represent the answer. First of all, I think it is undeniable that telcos have played a critical role in financial inclusion in developing nations. Thinking anything other than that would be to deny reality and facts that are very well established. There is no mobile money solution in the United States that is anywhere near as penetrated as M-Pesa is in Kenya. And if there had been one in the United States that had been that penetrated, we'd be hearing about it 24/7, about how it would almost certainly be a Silicon Valley unicorn and the future of everything. And it's not that M-Pesa isn't well known or Safaricom isn't well known, but it still doesn't get the level of publicity that it would have if it was in the United States. And the benefits from these platforms have been huge. They've been huge in Kenya, they've been huge in other countries. And so it is absolutely the case. They have a huge role to play, and they're in fact playing a huge role, and they are probably the most successful platforms in recent years in driving financial inclusion in developing nations. So that is a hard fact, I would say. And you ask yourself why that happened and what would that process look like. Well, I think it happened for a lot of reasons that kind of networks take off. Well, there was ubiquity, right? You hit a point where pretty much everyone had at least a mobile phone of some type. Because a lot of them started with basically trading phone credits, they were able to get going without a heavy regulatory regime in practice. And it was quite simple to use. And it filled a tremendous need that existed in these markets. If you wanted to move money from the city to your village, or to pay a vendor, or to pay school fees, these markets were operating in cash. And they were operating with deliveries of physical cash through buses and taxis. And obviously those had a high rate of failure, a high risk of fraud, slow, unreliable, expensive, high risk, as I mentioned. So it was a huge step forward for people to be able to do it. And you see that if you go all the way back to the first lesson, at some level, phone credits, as how things have started, served a lot of the purposes of a currency in that limited context, right? They're fungible. They are destructible, basically. It's hard to make fraudulent, right? They have a fairly stable store value. I mean, X minutes of telephony. Like over a long period of time, it wouldn't be a particularly stable store of value because telephony gets cheaper over time. But in the short term, day to day, month to month, they're quite stable. And so all of a sudden, the currency emerges, right? Somewhere where no one was really looking. I wonder if it was 1995 and I said, yeah, there's going to be a currency and it's going to be phone credits. It's ridiculous, right? But then when you think about it and you measure it against the things that make a currency more or less successful, it actually doesn't score very badly, right? Like your Safaricom credits aren't going to spoil in the heat on the way home, and they're not going to discover they don't work anymore, and you're not going to have any question between you and the other guy that you're trading with of if you've transferred them or not, and if they're valuable, and what do they do, and are they the real ones, and so on and so forth. And so, oddly enough, it turned out to be a pretty decent currency. So, what does this mean for Bitcoin and financial inclusion, and does it play a role here, and what role do regulators play, and so on? Well, this is not just for emerging economies. I believe the regulators play a huge role in the development of new financial technology anywhere in the world. Maybe in some theoretical long run, it all washes out to be the same thing. Yeah, probably, sort of, I think so, maybe. But in the short and intermediate case, the difference between a regulator who's trying to shut these things down and a regulator who's taking a laissez-faire approach or actively encouraging it will make a huge difference in how well it gets adopted. And I don't think there's any question about that. And that's not just a question of Bitcoin, it's a question of anything else. It could be these mobile telecom money is going to be, its success is going to be determined if the regulator takes a hard line and says you're a bank and you have to follow these procedures and these aren't workable procedures and so on. And if instead it's more laissez-faire, I think things will develop faster. So that's definitely an important point. I wonder if I'm a telco, I don't think I have a hugely pressing need to use Bitcoin to do this, right? I would prefer, for multiple reasons, that it just happens on my own platform. One, it's more straightforward, right? That's like one less thing to worry about. You probably have less AML and KYC exposure. You don't have to wonder about the source of funds or what have you. And you probably feel you have a more controlled platform where you are the one who is, you have an ecosystem locked in to using your money per se. And whether you're actually trading real money and you're a pseudo bank or you're trading phone credits, it's still a form of working capital. So there's still float, so to speak, right? Like it's better, imagine no one has prepaid phone credits, or a community of people is using phone credits to transact and goes and prepays $10,000 of phone credits, so they're just always keeping a balance of 10,000 phone credits. Well, it's a transfer, it's a permanent transfer of money, of working capital from you to the telecom. And so it's a pretty positive and pretty powerful position. So in that world, where does Bitcoin play a role? I would guess in three areas. The first goes back to the concept of it being an open settlement system. And it's a way to bridge these systems with other systems. So yeah, it's probably not immediately going to replace a Kenyan transferring to another Kenyan with M-Pesa, but it could be a way to get liquidity into that system from the UK, right? You're transferring UK pounds through Bitcoin to someone's phone in M-Pesa, and if you have in Kenya, and if there's a bridge to M-Pesa, it converts through that bridge and off you go. Or you want to transfer credits from your Kenyan phone provider to a Nigerian phone provider, and there could be interoperability if they are the same company, or if they have an agreement. But quite frankly, there's an easier way to build all types of interconnections by using a common bridge via Bitcoin, right? And use that as the rails to settle between these systems. And so that seems sensible. And that seems something that, honestly, if I was forward thinking, I think, as a telecom, it wouldn't bother me so much. I don't think it risks too much in my existing network, and it makes it more useful by extending it along. And this is the type of thing that you see BitPesa working on, right? Like, how do you do remittances to and within Africa, and then how do you exit out into different currencies in Africa, of which one of them, or the main one of them, was M-Pesa. And I think they had some back and forth with Safaricom, if I remember the history correctly. So I think they made a connection, and then Safaricom blocked their connection, and then I think they sorted it out ultimately. But it is a much faster and cheaper way to move money from the UK into the M-Pesa system than you're going to do a little bank and wire it, and try and take out the money and then deposit it in your phone. It's going to cost a lot of money. It'll take a lot longer to do than it would have otherwise, and so on. So that's one opportunity. The other opportunity could be countries that the telcos just haven't done this. I don't know if that means even if it means countries with a low level of development, or the telco hasn't moved yet, or there's other forms of instability. So that's the second bucket. I'm less sure how that plays out, but it's at least theoretically possible. And the third bucket is when you finally end up, and this is not just true for telco mobile money, but any usage of Bitcoin. Where Bitcoin becomes amazingly useful for remittances, money transfers, whatever you want to call them, is when people, where there's enough critical mass, enough network effect, enough acceptance of it as a currency, that you're not going in and out of other systems along the way. So if you're not thinking, hey, I need to start with British pounds and I want to end with M-Pesa credits, or I'm starting with US dollars, and I want to end up with Argentinian pesos or something. And so there you're going through exchanges or gateways on both ends, and it adds friction, it adds time, it adds, will the partner block your gateway or what have you. If you're just saying, if it can start and end with, I'm in Cyprus and I have Bitcoins in my Bitcoin wallet, and I want to send George $10 because he bought pizza last time and I didn't have my share to pay, and he's in Athens today, or he's in Brussels, or he's in Manila, and I just send him my $10, and that's that. Like, I've just sent him $10 worth of Bitcoins, and he's accepted $10 worth of Bitcoins, and he's happy to accept $10 worth of Bitcoins because either the value is stabilized enough that like he's happy holding them, or he knows other people that are willing to accept them, or there are enough merchants that are willing to accept them, right? And so if you solve that problem, if you get to a level of adoption, that problem solved, that's where I think you see more open systems like Bitcoin start to make the closed networks less relevant. Now, again, there's multiple factors that need to happen for that to get solved. Like that, one of it is just pure network effect items, where you have to get enough people using it so enough other people use it, and probably some sense of feeling of stability in the price, that you're not getting totally whipsawed around there, so people are willing to hold it for a few minutes, a few hours, a few days. And you know, a lot of the payment apps or the exchange apps try and bury that volatility and just give you the ability to send money in national currencies, even if underneath it on the rails, it's actually what is driving it is Bitcoin. If you ever got to a point where that wasn't needed, well, shoot, at that point, you really do have a global universal platform that works everywhere instantaneously. I want to send $20 to the Philippines. I just send $20 to the Philippines. That's it. I have to tell you, I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I will say it because it's relevant. I had to get some cash to someone yesterday, Sunday, in New York. I'm in Cyprus right now. I got someone cash in New York because they needed it for Monday morning. And so I couldn't, do a same day wire on Monday for them to get it later in the day or Monday. Because they needed the cash in hand for Monday morning. So what are my options? Well, Western Union. That's all I could think of that would actually work. And I went online on Western Union and I hit my credit card, and then the person could pick it up at a Western Union location, and it was a several $100 transaction, and the transaction fees were $60, my friends. $60. And I keep hearing in the mainstream press that there's no difficulties in developed nations in moving the stuff around. I'm just not so sure about that, right? Like, there was, excuse me, if there were no difficulties and everything was completely solved, I should have been able to get cash into someone's hands on a Sunday using some mechanism that didn't cost me $60. And so all I could think to myself is, isn't this ironic? Right? Isn't this ironic? Like, and I considered going and telling the person, like, well, go get a Bitcoin wallet and I'll just send you some Bitcoins. And then I'm like, well, is it going to work? Like, can he needs to spend money in New York City using cash on Monday. And he'll get the Bitcoins instantly, plus or minus. And can he cash it out soon enough? And is it going to be complicated? I have to explain it to him. Not quite. We're not quite there. But I will be shocked if 10 years from now that's how it is. I will be shocked that I can't just move it around 10 years from now and there's a way that it's either cash or cash-like in their ability to use it. Because that whole experience I just thought was silly. It felt wrong. It felt like that's not how it should work in 2016. And I feel like, and I'm not saying Western Union is being greedy per se. It's expensive to have a bunch of Western Union branches where you go and physically withdraw cash. Right? They have employees and rent and this and that. And I don't know how much the transaction should have cost, but I wouldn't expect it to cost zero. They have a lot of infrastructure to support to make that transaction possible. And at some level, it's impressive. Right? Like from Cyprus, I was able to go into a website and do some things, and a few minutes later, someone could walk into a Western Union and walk away with a few $100 in cash. So, like, pretty good, not bad. But, gosh, it still didn't feel right, right? It didn't feel that that's how it should be happening. I felt silly that I was doing it. I felt silly that, despite all this, that's how I had to transfer money yesterday. So, it seems like we could get to a point where there's enough ease of use, enough acceptance, enough on and off ramps that transaction could have been done in Bitcoin. And yeah, it wasn't actually remittances. It was for business purposes. Someone needed petty cash for a business project on Monday morning. And it was the very unusual Cyprus to New York remittance channel. Flows, and I don't know, call it the hair. And I'm like, well, look, isn't this the same issue that all remittances face? Right, like this is, all of them operate in different variations of this, and you know, I'm almost certain. I saw Jeremy Allaire speak last week at Consensus 2016. And his base assumption is that moving money from person to person in the future, and he didn't get pinned down on an exact date, 5 years, 7 years, 3 years. He didn't say, but it kind of felt like that's what we were talking about, is going to be free. And he said he didn't like the word remittances. I said that's it's going to seem archaic, and he said an interesting word he used that I thought resonated. And when was the last time you told someone that you sent a cross-border email? Right? Now, with letters, that construct works, right? Like, oh, I'm sending a letter to Cyprus. I kind of feel like that's going to be a whole project, and I need like special stamps. I need to weigh it, and I need to go to the post office and It's going to take some time. It's different than sending a letter domestically in the United States, right? I'm sending a letter to Pennsylvania is a different project than I'm sending a letter to Cyprus. Same class of project, but different. If I'm sending it to Pennsylvania, I just pull out my regular stamp of my stamp book, I throw it in the post office box, and that's that. If it's Cyprus, well, maybe I have stamps I can wait, or I have to go to the post office and wait. And I think like, oh yeah, it's an international letter. It's a cross-border letter. It's going to take several days to get there, maybe weeks to get there. And then you get to email, and that whole construct vanishes, right? Like, I email George many times every week. As a general rule, I don't know, I don't care. It doesn't matter where George is. He doesn't know, he doesn't care. It doesn't matter where I am. Sometimes he's in Greece and I'm in San Diego, and sometimes he's in Cyprus and I'm in New York, and sometimes we're both in Greece, we're both in Cyprus, and it never crosses your mind what that question is, right? And that's the world that Jeremy was pointing to. And I think there's a lot of sense to that. That right now, all of the solutions are still exposing the plumbing, right? It's like saying we're sending an email and the email is telling you, oh, I'm going to go through this router here and this email gateway there, and I'm going to take these 5 hops, and here's the actual route I'm taking to get there, right? I'm going BitPesa to M-Pesa to this, and it works one way if I'm doing it this way, and it works another way if I'm doing it the other way. Eventually, that's going to get abstracted away. I think that makes sense. Eventually, it's not like the plumbing is not going to exist at some level. It does, but it gets abstracted away. And what was interesting from Jeremy's perspective is that the cost of that transaction is going to be 0. Now, it's never exactly 0. What he's, I think, really saying is too low to meter, right? Like, email doesn't cost exactly 0 either, right? Someone paid for bandwidth for your email to pass through, and someone paid for an email server and what have you. But I got to the point that it's basically too low to meter. So I think in that type of world, telecom-specific mobile money makes less sense. But we're a ways away from that. No, we're a ways away from that. So I think, financial inclusion is a important topic. I think it's good for people to have those options. I think it's more important that they have those options than we get particularly religious about how they have those options. I think for many people, it's probably even easier and safer that they're doing it with a mobile telecom money, right? Like one of the other things that I agree with completely, yeah. There was a panel on consensus about this exact topic, financial inclusion in the emerging world, right? And one of the panelists said something that I believe absolutely. Says like, look, part of the reason that these hundreds of millions of people aren't tied into any banking system, including any mobile banking system, is that they don't have phones or they're not technologically literate. It's not like Bitcoin is the first piece of technology they're going to learn, right? Like they need to get a phone, right? And it's a lot of the other methods for reaching them are cost prohibitive, which is why it's not like any bank has went and actively said, great, I don't like having customers. I would like to financially exclude people. What it's more of is in a pre-mobile phone, pre-smartphone, pre-mobile money, pre-Bitcoin world, extending banking services to people involved infrastructure, or at least people, or in many cases infrastructure and people. And so someone has to do an analysis in the central office of if a branch in this village costs me X and to operate and the average deposit is Y and the transactions are Z, I'm going to lose my shirt operating a branch here because these are very poor people and it can't work, And so the branch never gets built, and so they're financially excluded, right? It's a bunch of kind of rational decisions along the way. But as you lower, I mean, the kind of key technology to this, if you really want to go to the base of it, is mobile phones. Right? Once you have a mobile phone, you can replicate a lot of what were formerly banking branch functions. And mobile phones have gotten progressively cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, right? They used to be a luxury product. We're now in the world of the $20, $30, $40 Android phones. And the prices are going to keep coming down. And so you're starting to get to the point over the next 5 to 10 years. I think, and George, chat me if I'm wrong, I think the number is still 1.5, 2 billion people with smartphones out of 7, something like that. And I forgot the number for feature phones, but there's still like a very substantial set of the world that doesn't even have feature phones, and substantial, much more substantial, doesn't even have a smartphone. And that's changing very rapidly, and literally billions of more people, billions, will come online. And as they come online, the ability to transact with mobile money becomes a possibility. And if you think of it that way, it's almost the most natural thing in the world that the telcos built these systems, right? Because the gating factor to be able to run a bottom of the pyramid, low transaction volume, small transaction volume, therefore low revenues, therefore you can't support the fixed cost of a staff member or a branch. The gating factor is having a mobile phone. And so logically enough, those folks become the ones who then push it. George is correcting me. He says feature phone penetration is close to 100%. I don't think that was right. I'll trust his judgment. And smartphone penetration is 20%. Right, I'm not going to argue with George. He's usually right on these things. It's interesting. The last two questions are similar. I think we're in a way address them. What insight can you give us on M-Pesa with blockchain and how it might, BitPesa with blockchain and how it might affect M-Pesa? I think we talked about it. It looks like BitPesa to me is aiming to be the connector between mobile money systems and between mobile money systems and the rest of the world. So it's like an settlement layer, a set of rails itself. So it's sensible. It's less likely, more difficult to replace M-Pesa, but more interesting to say, great, here's a way to get money into M-Pesa from abroad, or to move money from Kenya to Uganda, or from Uganda to Nigeria. And so that's a sensible enough approach. I think, I would be worried if I was BitPesa. I think they're doing a very difficult, challenging, worthy project. It's very impressive what they're doing. I would be worried that is there enough complexity in these combinations that the big telcos don't eventually go for a kind of a direct connection? I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. That would be, I think, now from a financial inclusion perspective, for a financial inclusion perspective, it doesn't matter, right? Like if BitPesa provokes the telecoms to go do these things themselves with Bitcoin or any other settlement system, then I think that's great. From BitPesa's perspective, obviously they would want that they become valuable enough in the ecosystem that for the big players, it's more useful for them to let BitPesa play that role and to try and push them out. There's probably going to be a little bit of tension back and forth, I think, between them. And another question was, why would this industry use blockchain versus their current local systems? I don't see the benefit to change technology. I think we covered that basically, that in many cases, it's right. There is no benefit to changing technology, and then there might be cases where it's helpful in interconnecting or in systems without well-established local systems, or if we do get to that ubiquitous world. In a ubiquitous world, the question gets reversed. Why do you need a local system? Right? Like, it's like having an internal corporate email system that's separate from a public email system. Needs a special way to connect and what have you. So in a ubiquitous world, but that's a way off. That's a ways off. I would argue it's sensible to believe that most developing world mobile money, bottom of the pyramid transactions the next 3 years are not going to be directly with Bitcoin, but they will be with other currencies or pseudocurrencies or banking systems or mobile money systems or pseudo banking systems. And over time, you'll see, I think, more of these blockchain-based approaches filling in the gaps or being more relevant in certain areas. So in a way, all these questions kind of tie together, I think. I think I have probably exhausted my thoughts on them. George has chatted me a question about the MSc, where someone asked, is 42 too old to go back to school and get another MSc? And that's an easy question. I'm going to argue absolutely not. We have had people in their 40s on this specific program. And I want to put this in context, not in the Bitcoin program, but in our law program. We had a lady graduate 2 years ago who was 93 years old. So she came back and did a law degree in her 90s. So 42, which, sorry, 42. You know, it's interesting. That is a very similar age to my current age. So just speaking from a personal perspective, I would like to think that's not too old for anything. And so if I certainly became involved in this area around that age, let's call it, broadly speaking, and I certainly think I have a lot to learn, and it's worthwhile learning and developing and moving in this direction. I look at my career and I figure I have at least another 20 years in me, maybe 30. And those 20, 30 years are going to correlate very closely when all these technologies actually roll out into the enterprise, onto the consumer side, and into any other areas. And in a way, when you take this all the way to its logical conclusion, you could argue it's an advantage for someone who has experience, knows how existing organizational, business, financial systems work, depending on what you actually focus on in your life, and then also knows these new areas. Because a lot of what sometimes happens, a lot of where wasted effort happens, is new technologies do tend to be adopted earlier by younger people. They need to look into them earlier, and that's wonderful. They're more receptive to it. But then those younger people tend to have less of an understanding of how existing systems work. And so you get a lot of kind of wasted effort where they go try things that have no chance of actually working, as opposed to, you know, the most successful person in implementing these things will also know what are the systems that they're trying to enhance or replace or change, because that's where you find the opportunities. There's no version of the world where overnight or in 3 years, our whole ledger-based economy, whether it's financial services or any other ledgers, is going to get torn up from the ground and replaced with Bitcoin and blockchain. That's not how anything works. It's not how any transitions work. It's not how the transition worked to TCP/IP. It's not how the transition is going to work to electric cars. It's not how things work. Things work one piece at a time. And so this is the same thing. Picking your spots and going after the right thing at the right time, or using the correct timing, is very important. And to do that, having an existing appreciation for how things work is actually an asset, not a liability, I might argue. Then he asked, so it's a different question. Would you like to share your emotional roller coaster, if at all, when Craig Wright happened again last week? Well, I will say my emotional roller coaster was highly limited. I am, at the first instance, not hugely emotionally invested in who Satoshi is. And so if it had turned out to be Craig, wonderful. If it turns out not to be Craig, which seems to be more likely to be the case, wonderful. He has a little bit of history on this topic. So unless he's running a extremely complex disinformation campaign to try really hard to convince everyone that he's not Satoshi, he has a pretty high hurdle of credibility to pass on. Was it him? And it was interesting. Within hours of, oh my God, it's him, and there's proof, the technical folks started saying, oh, wait a second. Very nice attempt at a proof to actually deceive you on whether there was really proof or not. And then, what complicated the issue was that Gavin and John both thought they had seen kind of irrefutable evidence that it was him. And that was unusual in terms of these Satoshi sightings. I can't tell you definitively it's not him. Maybe it's him and he's running a very complicated disinformation campaign. I think it's probably not him, because otherwise this whole thing doesn't really make sense, unless you really wanted to run a disinformation campaign. I am not hugely worked up about who Satoshi is. I was a little skeptical when I heard it was Craig, given his prior history on this topic. And then a few hours later, it was like, oh, right. It looks like even this one looks like very questionable. So, yeah, I mean, I guess on the whole, I'd prefer to know rather than not know, I guess. But we're starting, I think, to get to the point, and this is funny, where I think some people would prefer not to know. We're starting to get to the point where the creation myth is going to be better than the reality. Right? Like, one of the things that's nice about Satoshi as it is now is that everyone can project whatever they want on Satoshi. Right? He is this perfect, elite genius who left this project for the world, and okay, there's no rough edges to that, really. The second it becomes a living, breathing human being, everyone's imperfect. It is very likely that the real Satoshi, whether it's Craig or anyone else, and probably not Craig, is going to have a lot of rough, weird edges. And you're like, whoa, wait a second. Well, that's not the image I had built up in my head, right? I was envisioning something different. And wait, this guy just said something stupid about some other topic. The mythical Satoshi is never going to make a dumb comment about something, because he's never going to comment about anything again. Right? So everyone can project what they like there, and it has its great creation myth. And so it's interesting. I've noticed the tone change from a year or two ago. A year ago, everyone was almost unreservedly interested in the answer, yes or no. Prove it or disprove it. Is it Dorian? Is it not Dorian? Leave him alone. Stop bothering him. Or it is him, or it's not him. There was more intense interest. This time around, there was some interest, but within the core Bitcoin community, much less, other than debunking some of the things that were said. and a little bit of like, whatever, we've moved on. Doesn't matter. Even if he came riding on a horse with banners and proving definitively 6 different ways that it's him, wonderful. And, well, then what? Like, what special place of honor does he get at that point? Does he get any special extra privileges? He'll be a voice, probably have some credibility on some topics, but the project's developed a lot since he was last involved in it. Right? There's a lot of people with a lot of opinions, there's a lot of work on the project, where you see in these like pseudo-religious debates on things like block size, right? And so if he comes, he's inevitably going to disappoint a lot of people. He'll either disappoint a lot of people by not saying anything when they'll expect him to say something. Tell us what you think about block size, right? Like, what was your original vision? If he doesn't say anything, then much people go, well, why not? Or if he says something, well, a lot of people are disappointed because he'll say something that a lot of people don't like. And so I wonder if this is one of the reasons he did pull out. Or who knows, maybe he pulled out for privacy reasons, security reasons, tax reasons, I don't know. But maybe there's also something to him to say, if you don't want it to be associated deeply with you, you have to pull back like that. And you see some hints of that in, the less extreme versions with things like Craigslist, right? Craig from Craigslist very deliberately pushed off managerial roles. He literally does customer support for Craigslist. He did not want to be the supreme leader of the company. Right, he still owns. He's a very wealthy man from it. But he answers customer support emails, and he does not want to have that role. And I think this is kind of how Bitcoin has played out that way. Has left this, everyone can project whatever they want to project on Satoshi, and feel okay about it. And think of like any religious leader from the past, or any great national leader from the past. Like if George Washington came back to life and started walking around the United States today, I bet he'd say all types of like silly and embarrassing things by today's standards, even if he was a wonderful man back then. So George Washington, the myth, and George Washington, the human being, probably somewhat different. Buddha, the myth, and Buddha, the human being, probably something different. Right? And so Satoshi, the myth, is starting to build momentum in currency that, no pun intended, that Satoshi, the human being, will probably be a little bit of a letdown, almost whoever it is. Because it's almost certainly, like everyone else on planet Earth, has some flaws. Whereas Satoshi, the myth, has no flaws. We only know that he did this very smart project and was super successful, and what a cool dude did that. And we won't get to see that he's strange or difficult in a few other ways. So you add all those things together, and I'm fairly relaxed about the topic. And I wouldn't say I'm as far as saying I don't want to find out. If it turns out that someone comes and provides definitive proof, and it's a complicated question. Amin Gore from Cornell has written, I think, the best blog post on this topic of what would be considered proof. And by the way, he's why I'm being so careful here, because he's saying, like, lack of proof is not proof that it's not someone. Right? Like, George might not be able to prove that he's Satoshi, or has not proved that he's Satoshi, but that doesn't prove that he's not Satoshi, George. But I don't know. I'm fairly relaxed about the topic. My emotional roller coaster was pretty limited. It was more like one of those like rides for 2-year-olds, as opposed to the Six Flags Great Adventure 80-foot thriller. So I think that's where I am. Any final questions? We're at the end of our time, I think, for this session. I want to thank you all for joining this program. It is one of my favorite things to do, to be a part of this, to answer your questions, to see your responses on various things. There are thousands of you now out in the world that are know about this topic and are looking out for this topic. At the conference last week, several students from prior MOOCs, who I did not know by name, came and found me and said, "I know you." And I said, "Okay. Why?" They said, "Oh, you taught my MOOC." And it's always now my default assumption when someone at a Bitcoin conference says, "I know you," and I don't know who they are. It's probably someone from the MOOC. And so I had some nice chats with people doing interesting things. You know, some people, one of them was building an Ethereum coding environment with some other folks. He had taken the MOOC twice. Someone else was a student, a college student. And so it's really neat. And so I enjoy it. And I encourage you to stay involved in any case with us with the program. I think we're by far the highest concentration of people in the world interested in this topic. We're trying to create more ways for people to interact, post the MOOC, post the program. I think George has a Slack group, but I don't know if that's the full way we should do it, or if there's other ways we should keep people together. But it is a great set of people in aggregate with interest on this topic. And so if you have any ideas, if you have any concepts, if you want to interact with us in some way, if you have ways, projects we think we should do, things you think we should organize, by all means get in touch. Let us know. Throw out suggestions. You want to make a alumni group in your country to kick around thoughts, throw ideas to us. These are all interesting ideas. We're honestly thinking our way through this. How do we keep folks and keep the conversation going after the course? And so I'm open to ideas. As I've mentioned before, Twitter is a very good place to find me. I think it's a decent place to find the program as well. We're pretty active I'm pretty active, and the program's account is fairly active too. And so it's a good way to throw ideas at us if something comes up. So I think with that, I want to wish you good luck on your finals. I want to encourage you, if you do have interest, to apply to the MSc, speak to an enrollment advisor, speak to George, ask me any questions you want, and we hope to see a lot of you on the MSc in June. And then George, do you know when we're running the MOOC the second time?
One more time.
When's the second 2016 MOOC running?
Starts on September the 5th.
Right, so we're doing the MOOC again on September the 5th. So if you have friends, family, relatives, colleagues, fellow students who you think would enjoy it, let them know. We'd love to have them on board. A surprising number of people have told me they've taken it twice, more than I expected. So if you want to come again, by all means, we'll be here. We'll be doing it again. And but definitely tell your friends, tell your family, tell your fellow students. We'd love to have people on board. We consider this part of our contribution to the Bitcoin community. And the more people who can benefit, the happier we are. So with that, I think I'm going to sign off. And I want to also say, none of this would actually operate in practice if it wasn't for George. He is instrumental in making this happen. He keeps all the trains running on time. I would certainly be lost at sea if it wasn't for him. And I think the program He's hugely valuable to the program and to the MOOC. So I want to thank him for all of his work and keeping us heading in the right direction. And I look forward to seeing how many of you take and do well on the final this weekend.